It was a move that should have made headlines, but it didn't. In 2014, the U.S. government chose to drop a rock-solid case against a man they knew had committed massive fraud against the U.S. government. Because revealing how they found him would have exposed a shady surveillance tactic, one that they didn't want you and I to know about. This is part one of the fascinating story of Daniel Rigmaiden, a thief who got caught but then did something most criminals only dream of. He found a loophole he could walk through to regain his freedom. And that loophole was called Stingray. This story has fascinated me for years. So in this episode of How Hacks Happen, I wanted to share it with you. It starts with a hacker named Daniel Rigmaiden. Back in the early 2000s, Rigmaiden is just another guy hanging around the dark web, looking for a way to make money without getting a job. He, like many other hackers, had a sort of F the establishment attitude, like, I'm not going to join the rat race just to work for the man. Instead of making money from a job, they steal it. And in Rigmaiden's case, it was stealing from the government. Now, at this point, Rigmaiden is already adept at making fake IDs and setting up false bank accounts and falsifying documents like utility bills. But then, around 2005, he figures out how to commit tax fraud by filing tax returns for people who are not him. I'm not going to get into the details of how he did it because I don't want to encourage any wannabe criminals out there, but let's just say that it was easier than it should have been. And Rigmaiden, he thinks this is just great. Over a period of 3 years, he manages to file for $4 million in fraudulent tax returns. Now, the feds eventually catch on that this tax fraud is going on, and they start watching the fraudulent requests. And they even catch some of the other criminals involved. But they don't know who's the main guy behind this one particular set of thieves. Largely because the main guy, Rigmaiden, is very careful. Feds keep trying to track his IP address, but he always hides it. He uses a proxy, an intermediary computer that makes it look like the connection is coming from somewhere else other than he is, like it's Seattle, New York, or the Netherlands, or anywhere else. What the feds do eventually figure out is that Rigmaiden isn't using cable to connect to the internet. He's using something called an air card. And this particular air card actually ends up being the star of this particular show. You could even say that this air card changed history. So let's take a minute to answer the question, what exactly is an air card? Now, you crazy young folks maybe never heard of an air card. And that is lucky for you. You have it easy these days with Wi-Fi in every coffee shop and truck stop and airport. And if you don't have that, you have a great cell connection, even when you're out in the middle of nowhere. But back in the old days, and by old days I mean like 20 years ago, those of us who made our living entirely online had to figure something out so we could at least get out of the house once in a while. And that meant having an air card. These days, if you don't have internet access but you have a cell phone, you just make your phone a hotspot and connect your PC to it. Or you can just check your email on your phone. But back in the early 2000s, most cell phones were basically flip phones, and they couldn't make hotspots or get your email. And there were still a lot of coffee shops and train stations and truck stops and airports and even people's houses where there was no Wi-Fi. Ask me how I know. Well, I will be happy to tell you. Most of my jobs since 2002 have been based online, which means I had to be able to access the internet during working hours no matter where I was. And back in the early 2000s, this was a continual problem I had to solve. Enter the air card. An air card is this little gizmo that's basically its own little mini cell phone with its own phone number. And it can hook you up to the cellular network. And it functions as its own hotspot, so you can connect to the internet. Physically, it's a little card-shaped thing that you plug into your computer through the USB port, and voila, you have internet access. And that, children, is what we did back in the Stone Age, when we needed to stay connected wherever we went. Yeah, I was one of those people, and I actually bought 3 different air cards in the 2000s through AT&T, upgrading every couple of years to smaller and faster versions, and it made my life so much easier. These air cards were not cheap, and you had to pay monthly to keep the service going, but it was worth it for me. I mean, a lot of hotels didn't even have internet back then, or it was so bad that I couldn't get anything done. And the air card came to the rescue. But, by around 2010, we could just use our phones as hotspots, and we could even get email on our phones, so I didn't need to get air cards anymore. But air cards are still available today for people who need this kind of connectivity for one reason or another. And they're smaller and faster and less expensive than they ever have been. So, back to Rigmaiden in 2003. Instead of getting cable internet for his apartment, he had an air card from Verizon. And that's how he connected to the internet, where he submitted fake documents to the IRS to commit tax fraud. While the feds are keeping an eye on all this activity, they eventually figure out that someone, they don't know who, is using this specific air card to commit tax fraud. They have the identity number associated with that air card, but that's all they've got. Every cellular device has a few identifying numbers, which the device transmits to the cell towers when it connects. This is how the provider knows who's connecting. Every device has a bunch of different identifying numbers, like the manufacturer's serial number and the IMEI, or International Mobile Equipment Identity Number. And each carrier has its own ID number. In the case of Verizon, it's the ESN, or Electronic Serial Number, associated with that air card. And the feds have the air card's ESN, but that's all they've got. The feds really want to get this tax fraud guy, so they get a warrant for Verizon to provide them with all the information they have on this air card, and Verizon complies. Now, before we go on with this story, let's take a little side road to talk about what your cell provider collects about you and what it could provide to law enforcement and why they need a warrant for it. Cell service providers generally just collect metadata, meaning data about your data. They need to know your phone number and the number you're calling so they can route the call and display your number on the other person's phone. And they do keep track of how long the call lasted, but that's about it. They don't record the content of the actual conversation. Like, they don't record your calls, just the data about your call. And that's metadata. Then there's your text messages. They track the number you texted and when you sent it, so they can deliver the message and display the sent time. But they generally don't keep the content of your text messages for long, like maybe a few days at most, just long enough to ensure delivery. After that, the messages are gone, and all that's left is the metadata. If you use an air card to connect to the internet, your provider will track how long you were connected, and it can track the websites you go to in some circumstances. Nowadays, most websites provide a secure, encrypted connection, and in that case, the cell provider can't see it. Or if you use a VPN, they can't see it. What the cell provider doesn't do, ever, is track what you're doing at the website, like what pages you're looking at or For example, what kind of pet treats you're searching for at chewy.com. In fact, tracking your internet activity in great detail, or recording the content of your calls, or keeping your text messages beyond what they need to in order to provide the service, all these things are prohibited by law, by the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986. And besides, why would they want to keep all that stuff? It would take up huge, enormous amounts of storage, which gets expensive. And really, when it comes down to it, Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile, they just want to bill you for your cell service and get paid. They don't care that your dog likes bacon strips, or that your Aunt Gertrude's birthday is coming up, or that you want your husband to pick up some tortilla chips on the way home. And don't get the cheap kind this time, okay, hon? Your cell provider just pretty much wants you to pay your bill. And these rules about what your cell provider can and can't keep about your cell activity is also governed to a large degree by the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which protects the privacy of U.S. citizens. Allow me to refresh you with the actual Fourth Amendment. Can I have some music? Oh yeah, good. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. I love the Fourth Amendment. Kind of have to, because when I was studying mobile forensics, we practically had to memorize it. Because as someone who can get into your phone and pull out all its secrets, including all those deeply personal messages you sent on WhatsApp or Signal, it is my responsibility to make sure that if I am doing that I am within the law. And I can tell you, I take this very seriously. I have been, from time to time, asked to do an illegal search of someone's phone, and I say no. And even if I do look at your phone, I am looking at it for the purpose of a court case or a particular investigation, not because I care about your nude pics that you sent to that guy on Tinder or when you were going through a rough patch. I mean, unless it has to do with the case, which it pretty much never does. So don't sweat it. Oh, nice tattoo, by the way. Okay, back to the Fourth Amendment. It basically means that law enforcement or tax collectors or government officials can't just randomly barge into your house whenever they feel like it to rifle through your cabinets. They need a search warrant to do that. The Fourth Amendment has its roots in a political speech given in 1761, a full 15 years before the newly minted United States government signed the Declaration of Independence. That's how deeply rooted it is in the fabric of the United States. And the Fourth Amendment itself was passed in 1791. Yeah, like over 200 years ago. And it's been in place ever since, protecting you and me and everybody else from prying eyes and random persecution. The language only refers to persons, houses, papers, and effects, not cell phones, but it has come to cover phone conversations, emails, internet activity, and your cell phone itself. But it wasn't always so. In the early days of cell phones, like prior to 2010, if you got arrested, like say in a bar fight or a drug bust, the police could grab your cell phone and just start poking through your pictures and text messages and seeing who you called and when. But one by one, different states started passing laws prohibiting this from happening without a warrant or probable cause, stating that doing so would be a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. And in 2014, it became federal law. So far, we've covered a few things that a cell provider stores when a device connects to a cell tower. Some metadata, and somewhere in their records, they have the billing information. Cell providers also store information about which towers the device pinged when it connected. So back to the feds and the data they got from Verizon. I can just imagine how excited they were. They're gonna see this guy's billing address and they're gonna nail him. But even with a warrant, the feds got a fake name and address. It was actually a P.O. box. And it had the metadata and the list of towers it had pinged, but it didn't have an address. Because you see, Rigmaiden is a clever one. He paid cash for his air card at a store, and he showed a fake ID with a different person's name on it and a P.O. box for an address. So the feds, after serving a warrant on Verizon to supply all the information they had about this one subscriber, they didn't really get what they needed. What they did get, though, was the general location of the perpetrator. To understand how the feds made the best possible use of this little tidbit, let's talk about how your cell provider determines where your phone is. When you use your cell phone, it pings off the 3 or 4 cell towers closest to you. To understand how this works, imagine you draw a circle around each of these 3 cell towers. Where all the circles intersect, somewhere in there is your cell phone. The cell towers can get a little more accurate about where you are by comparing how long it takes the signal to arrive. And this tells the system which tower you're closer to, and it can make some educated guesses about where your cell phone is, but that's about it. This process is called triangulation, which is an old term related to surveying land for angles between this and that. By measuring how far your phone is from this or that tower, the cellular system can kind of figure out your general area. But the cell towers can't figure out exactly where you are down to the pinpoint. It could be off by several hundred feet in city areas, or in places where the cell towers are far apart, like out in the country, it could be off by half a mile. And even today, 20 years after our story takes place, triangulation is only so accurate. If you've ever used the Find My Phone app, you know what I'm talking about. Like, it tells you that your phone is across the street in your neighbor's yard, and you get all riled up and ready to run over there and yell at your neighbor about their good-for-nothing teenage daughter who clearly broke into your house and took your phone. Right about the time when your spouse finds your phone stuffed between the sofa cushions in your own living room. So yeah, not exactly pinpoint accurate. So for the feds, being able to trace Daniel Rigmaiden's air card to this one neighborhood in California didn't tell them exactly where he was, just the general area. And they weren't about to go door to door to look for him. So the feds had to get a bit more clever to pinpoint Rigmaiden's location. For that, they used something called a Stingray. What do we mean when we say Stingray, you may well ask? Well, we're not talking about this big, wide, flat fish that might bite you. It's actually an electronic device that can greatly narrow down the location of any cellular device, way more accurately than cell tower data. A Stingray is basically a cell tower in a box, like around the size of a small suitcase. It's got some buttons and knobs and doodads on it, and you might mistake it for, like, computer networking equipment. It doesn't look like anything special on the outside. Oh, but on the inside, ho-ho! The Stingray works by pretending to be a cell tower, sending out a signal for cell phones and air cards. It's like, hey, I'm a cell tower and I'm closer than all the other cell towers. You can just connect with me, okay? And your cell phone's like, okay, hi, cell tower. I'm trying to call my mom. And the Stingray would collect up things like your phone number, your phone's identifier, and basically all the stuff a cell tower would grab. And it can also tell how far it is from any of these devices that connect to it. So, how is a Stingray different from a stationary cell tower? Because if the Stingray picks up a signal from a particular identifier that it's looking for, it can keep moving around to try and get as close as possible to the device. Left, a little to the right. Oh, warmer, warmer, colder, warmer. Oh, okay. This is the strongest signal from that device. And voila! It can narrow down where a signal is coming from, down to a single street address. So the feds put the Stingray in a van, and they start driving around Rigmaiden's neighborhood, waiting for his air card to connect to it. If you happened to be in that neighborhood at that time, and you attempted to call someone or tried to connect to your Verizon cell tower with an air card, you'd instead be connected to that Stingray. And what the Stingray did was it snorted up every cellular interaction in the area as it passed by. Trying to call your Aunt Gertrude to wish her happy birthday? The Stingray grabbed that. A couple of kids using an air card to play a video game? Stingray grabbed that too. Now, the Stingray wouldn't pass the connection on. If you connected to the Stingray, it would just grab your phone number and a few other details and disconnect you. Now, we've all had mysterious disconnections when trying to call someone, so if you were in that sweep back in 2008, you probably wouldn't have even noticed. You just call again, no big deal. But here's the thing. In looking for Rigmaiden's air card, the feds had to look at all the devices that connected to the Stingray to determine that they didn't match the RSN that they were looking for. So wait a second. You may well ask, isn't that a Fourth Amendment violation? I'm just walking around the neighborhood making a phone call and the feds are tracking me? What? And you would have an excellent point, one that will become important later in Rigmaiden's story. Anyway, back to the feds. In that sweep of Rigmaiden's neighborhood with the Stingray, they narrow down the location of his air card. It leads them to this one apartment building in Santa Clara, California. And with a little bit of old-fashioned, Sherlock Holmes-style sleuthing, they determine exactly where he's living. So they get a warrant for that apartment, of course still with the wrong name, and they swoop in and arrest Rigmaiden, and they find tons of evidence in the apartment. There's fake IDs and printouts of names of deceased persons and their social security numbers, among other things. And from what they find, there is absolutely no doubt that this is the guy who's tried to steal around $4 million from the U.S. government through tax fraud. So Rigmaiden is locked up to await trial without bail. And you'd think that would be pretty much the end of the story, right? It's one we've all heard before. There's a trial, and then there's a sentence handed down by the judge, and another criminal is put away. But that's not what happens. Not even a little bit. That's all we have time for today. In the next episode, you'll find out how Rigmaiden pulled off one of the most amazing legal feats in the history of cybercrime and struck a deal so he could walk free, and how his case set a precedent for many more that came after, with legal decisions that speak directly to what the government can and can't do when it comes to surveillance on us regular old citizens. This is Michelle Bousquet from How Hacks Happen, signing off for the day. Stay safe out there.